For 30 million years, California's coast was home to sprawling underwater forests, giant kelp strands growing 2 feet in a single day, sheltering over 800 species. But almost overnight, these epic realms vanished, replaced by endless barrens of spiky purple urchins. The official story blames climate change and disease, but California's underwater forests vanished because one so-called pest, the sea otter, was nearly erased by human greed. Now, scientists are racing against time, reintroducing otters to restore what was lost, with stakes higher than anyone imagined. Why did bringing back this adorable predator become California's last hope? And what's still standing in the way? Stretching from the fog-shrouded coves of Mendocino to the sunlit waters near San Diego, California's kelp forests once formed one of the planet's most extraordinary living structures. These are not forests of wood and leaf, but of bull kelp, giant algae that rise from the sea floor to the ocean's surface, forming canopies that sway with every surge and current. Bull kelp is a marvel of speed and resilience. Each spring, it grows from a microscopic spore to a towering stalk, sometimes reaching 30 meters tall in a single season. At their peak, these underwater forests can expand by as much as 60 centimeters in a single day, outpacing almost every other organism on Earth. But it's not just the size or speed that sets them apart. For over 30 million years, these forests have been the foundation of life along the Pacific coast. More than 800 species depend on the kelp for food, shelter, and breeding grounds. Sea lions hunt in the shadows of the fronds. Rockfish and abalone find refuge among the holdfasts that anchor kelp to the rocky bottom. Even the smallest creatures, crabs, snails, and countless invertebrates, carve out their own worlds in the tangled undergrowth. Every layer of this forest teems with life. At dawn, sunlight filters down through the kelp canopy, creating a world of shifting gold and green. Otters twist through the stalks, searching for urchins. Schools of silvery perch dart between blades. The forest floor is alive with movement. Nudibranchs, brittle stars, and anemones, all woven into a web that links predator and prey, plant and animal together. To grasp the scale of what's at stake, it helps to remember just how ancient and productive these forests are. They have survived ice ages and shifting continents. They have shaped the very coastline, buffering waves and trapping carbon with every new season's growth. In the silence beneath the waves, California's kelp forests have quietly built one of the richest, most dynamic ecosystems on Earth, a realm where the balance of life depends on a delicate, sometimes invisible thread. Here's how the whole system stays in balance. At the center of California's underwater forests is a chain reaction scientists call a trophic cascade, a kind of ecological domino effect. Sea urchins feed on kelp, carving out patches as they graze. But in a healthy forest, their numbers never get out of control. That's because sea otters, with their endless appetite, keep the urchin population in check. An adult otter can eat up to a quarter of its body weight every single day, about 15 to 25 pounds of seafood, much of it spiky purple urchins. This daily hunt is more than just survival. Each otter acts like a living anchor, holding the entire ecosystem together. When otters are present, urchins stay hidden in crevices, too afraid to venture out and mow down the kelp. With urchins contained, kelp forests grow thick and tall, providing food and shelter for hundreds of other species. Rockfish, abalone, and sea stars all depend on this balance. Even the smallest creatures, shrimp, snails, and brittle stars, find their niche in the dense fronds and tangled holdfasts. Remove otters and the whole system starts to wobble. Urchins multiply, leaving the kelp exposed and vulnerable. Without the kelp, the entire forest community begins to unravel. That's the power of a keystone species, one animal holding up the weight of an entire ecosystem. It's a fragile balance, invisible from the surface, but absolutely essential for life along the Pacific coast. This is why the presence or absence of otters can mean the difference between a thriving underwater forest and a barren wasteland. The cascade is simple, but the consequences are profound. When the otter is lost, the dominoes begin to fall. In the mid-1700s, a new kind of gold rush swept the Pacific coast. Traders from Europe and Russia had discovered the southern sea otter, a creature wrapped in the densest fur on Earth. Each square inch held up to 1 million hairs, a living pelt so warm and water-resistant that it was valued above silver, above gold. Skins were bundled by the hundreds, then by the thousands, packed into shipholds bound for China and Europe. Merchants logged cargoes of up to 1,500 pelts per voyage, and contracts with Aleut and Kodiak hunters fueled a relentless hunt. The price for a single pelt soared, sometimes fetching more than a labourer's yearly wage. Indigenous communities were drawn into the trade, their traditional hunting transformed into an industry driven by foreign demand. The consequences came swiftly. In less than a century, the southern sea otter population crashed from as many as 20,000 animals to the edge of extinction. By 1911, fewer than 50 otters clung to survival along the remote cliffs of Big Sur, a remnant so small that every modern otter descends from these last survivors. The world's most luxurious fur had created a biological bottleneck, an entire species reduced to a handful by human greed. The otter's only defense, its incredible fur, became its undoing. The 1911 Fur Seal Treaty arrived just in time to halt the slaughter, but the damage was done. The kelp forests, once held in balance by otters, were left exposed. The entire system had depended on a single predator, and now that thread was nearly severed. The story of the fur trade is a warning. Even the most ancient, resilient ecosystems can unravel in a single human lifetime. Disaster didn't arrive all at once, it unfolded in 2 blows, each more devastating than the last. In 2013, divers along the California coast started pulling up sea stars with strange white lesions. Within weeks, entire reefs were littered with limp, dissolving bodies. The culprit was a fast-moving disease called sea star wasting syndrome, likely triggered by a densovirus. It swept from Alaska to Southern California, wiping out more than 90% of sunflower sea stars almost overnight. These massive predators, with their dinner plate bodies and 24 arms, had been the last line of defense against purple urchins. Their disappearance left the door wide open. Then came the heat. Starting in late 2014, a vast mass of warm water known as the blob settled off the west coast. Ocean temperatures spiked by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, enough to stress even the hardiest kelp. The warmer water held less oxygen and fewer nutrients, stunting kelp growth just as urchin numbers exploded. The kelp forests, already weakened, couldn't keep up. The effects were immediate and brutal. In less than 5 years, 96% of Northern California's kelp canopy vanished. What used to be thick forests stretching for miles became empty seascapes, the bottom carpeted in purple spines. A longtime abalone diver from Mendocino remembers swimming out and seeing nothing but urchins. It was like a moonscape. No kelp, no fish, just purple as far as you could see. With both top predators gone and ocean conditions stacked against recovery, the ecosystem flipped. Once thriving forests turned into barren wastelands. The scale of the loss stunned even the most seasoned biologists. For the first time in living memory, the future of California's underwater forests was truly in doubt. The question became urgent. Could anything be done to stop the collapse? Or was this the end for one of the world's great marine ecosystems? Divers in thick wetsuits have spent thousands of hours hunting purple urchins by hand, hauling them up one basket at a time from rocky reefs stripped bare. The numbers are staggering. In Mendocino County alone, more than 50,000 pounds of urchins have been removed from just 2 small restoration sites. But with over 350 kilometers of coastline transformed into urchin barrens, the math doesn't add up. Each acre can cost $6,000 to $10,000 a year to clear, and the urchins keep coming back. For every patch reclaimed, new waves of urchins crawl in from the edges, undoing months of effort in a matter of weeks. So, scientists turn to technology. In a converted warehouse, kelp technicians like Andrew Kim tend rows of bubbling tanks, coaxing bull kelp from microscopic spores into young blades several feet long. These lab-grown plants are then transplanted onto the seafloor, sheltered inside raised beds. Mesh cages designed to keep hungry urchins out until the kelp is strong enough to survive. For a few months, the results look promising. Patches of green return where there was only rock. Fish and invertebrates find shelter again. But without a natural predator to keep urchin numbers low, these islands of recovery remain fragile and temporary. "We can buy time," says one technician, "but we can't outplant our way to a healthy ocean." The limits of human engineering are clear. Restoring balance at scale will take more than tools and tanks. It will require bringing back the missing pieces of the ecosystem itself. Inside a quiet, behind-the-scenes wing of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, a team of specialists prepares for a rescue that could reshape an entire ecosystem. When a stranded otter pup arrives, every step is deliberate. First comes the health screening. Veterinarians check for domoic acid, Toxoplasma gondii, and other threats common along California's coast. Only when a pup is cleared does the real experiment begin. Instead of hand-raising these orphans, staff introduce them to experienced surrogate mothers, adult females who have already shown the patience and instincts needed to guide a young otter through its earliest days. The process is carefully choreographed. Human caregivers wear black gowns and gloves, and face shields to mask their appearance and scent. Feeding, grooming, and training all happen out of sight, behind barriers that keep pups from ever connecting a human face with food or comfort. The surrogate mothers teach the vital skills: how to dive for urchins, how to crack open a crab, how to keep that famously dense fur clean and waterproof. Each lesson is a step toward independence, a rehearsal for life back in the wild. When a pup is ready, a tiny radio transmitter is implanted just beneath the skin. This device will track every dive, every meal, every mile performed after release. For weeks, researchers follow the young otter's progress from a distance, logging weight, foraging success, and social bonds with wild otters. Some, like the pup known as Otter 956, struggle at first, losing weight, lingering near shore, unsure of the new world. But with time, many adapt, joining foraging groups and carving out their own place in the Slough. The journey from orphan to ecosystem engineer is measured in careful notes, radio pings, and the slow, steady return of life to the kelp forests. Elkhorn Slough, a winding estuary north of Monterey, became the proving ground for a new kind of restoration. In the early 2000s, only about 20 otters called these tidal channels home. Over the next 15 years, 37 surrogate-reared otters were released here, each one tracked, monitored, and studied as they learned to hunt, socialize, and survive. By 2018, the population had climbed past 100, making Elkhorn Slough the highest density otter habitat on the coast. But the comeback went deeper than numbers. As otters returned, the marsh banks, once eroding rapidly from burrowing crabs, began to stabilize. Eelgrass meadows, nearly wiped out by pollution and overgrazing, rebounded, their blades growing thick and green even as runoff continued from nearby farms. Long-term monitoring showed that average creek bank erosion slowed by nearly 70%. Underwater fish and invertebrate diversity surged. The entire estuary shifted piece by piece back toward resilience. For the first time, scientists could measure the ripple effect of a single predator, not just on kelp, but on the very shape of the land. Monterey Bay stands as a rare stronghold for California's sea otters and the kelp forests they protect. Here, the otter population has climbed from a handful of survivors to more than 3,000 animals today. A comeback that draws scientists, divers, and tourists from around the world. Kayakers drift through kelp canopies, hoping for a glimpse of otters cracking open urchins on their chests. Whale watching, diving, and otter viewing tours have become pillars of a thriving coastal economy, with ecotourism in the region generating hundreds of millions of dollars each year. But prosperity comes with limits. For nearly 2 decades, the southern sea otter's range has remained stuck between Half Moon Bay and Gaviota. The reason isn't lack of habitat or food in Monterey. It's the gauntlet of great white sharks at the edges. Most otters bitten by sharks don't survive, even though sharks rarely eat them. Annual surveys show that more than half of otter deaths at the range boundaries are now caused by shark bites. The population in Monterey has hit a biological ceiling, thriving within its safe zone, but unable to expand further up or down the coast. Even where otters have made a comeback, the path ahead is anything but simple. Disease remains a constant threat. Nearly 70% of California's southern sea otters have been exposed to Toxoplasma gondii, a parasite that enters the ocean from cat feces washed down storm drains. Domoic acid, a neurotoxin produced by harmful algal blooms, builds up in shellfish and can poison otters who depend on them for food. Both threats are tracked in necropsy reports, and together they account for a major share of otter deaths each year. But the debate isn't just about biology. Along the north coast, commercial fishermen and divers worry about what a new wave of otters might mean for their livelihoods. At a Mendocino County meeting, one urchin diver put it bluntly, "We can't have the otter wipe out our last chance at a living." Fish and wildlife officials respond that any reintroduction must be deliberate, with local voices at the table. Federal studies show San Francisco Bay could support several thousand otters, but only if water quality, prey, and human impacts are addressed head-on. The question isn't whether otters can return, but how to do it in a way that balances ecosystem repair with the realities of coastal life. Every decision now is shaped by caution, compromise, and the hard lessons of the past. Over 95% of Northern California's kelp canopy vanished in just 10 years, a loss documented across 350 kilometers of coast. Archival records show that sea otter populations, once reduced to only 50 individuals by 1911, have now recovered to more than 3,000, driving dramatic rebounds where they return. Released otters in Elkhorn, Slough grew the population fivefold, slowed erosion by 69%, and restored seagrass despite decades of decline. Yet critical questions remain. Scientists are still assessing if enough clean habitat exists to reintroduce otters to their historic range, and shark mortality continues to limit their spread. Toxoplasma gondii infects over 65% of adults, and domoic acid from algal blooms threatens their health. The US Fish and Wildlife Service is actively studying new sites, but full recovery depends on addressing these unresolved risks. The evidence is clear. The fate of California's underwater forests is tied to the presence and survival of a single keystone predator.